Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Highland Reserve. We have a very long awaited and vital addition to our zoo today. You'll already know from the thumbnail and the intro, but let's give a warm welcome to the Highland cows. Yes, wonderful, yes. Finally, we have Highland cows at the Highland Reserve. We are now the real deal. That's right, for doing a couple of favours for our good friends over at the farm, we got a solid deal on a number of cows. And a wham slab of beef bull that is really something special. The eagle-eyed among you may have noticed the layout of this enclosure in the previous episode. As soon as the possibilities of cows appeared, I had already planned out our whole future together, including an unnecessarily enormous barn. Yep, in a place that already builds things too big for the animals within them, I tried to build a cowshed the size of a Costco. Mercifully, I came to my senses and shrunk it down by a bit, but it still ended up dwarfing the cows. Now, I didn't see this as, too much of a problem, because I've seen barns with high roofs and it seems like a fairly common thing for cow farms, but it does feel a bit empty with the small number of animals we have at the moment. I think scale will be something I consider a bit more when I make barns and animal shelters in the future. I'm just paranoid about the hitboxes since they're chickens. I'm pretty sure I mentioned in a previous video, I think it might have been the Swan Pond episode, that there may be a square pen incoming that had a couple of really nice features. Well, this enclosure is made up of 2 squares and was built without a proper plan or direction, which unfortunately I think shows a bit. I wanted to recreate a barn style that I've seen before, with concrete or breeze block half wall and wooden slats framed by steel beams for support. So I started there, but I didn't really look into the coverage requirements of the animals, so instead of working the barn into the enclosure to create one continuous habitat, it sort of feels like a barn and then a pasture, which is not the end of the world. That's often how cows are kept. It just seems a bit out of place here, and then because of the low coverage, it sort of became impossible to properly tie the two together. Shrinking the barn down was probably the smartest decision I made here, and as I say, it's still a bit big. You may notice that I start using the animals as references for some future builds to make sure things look proportional. That being said, I think this barn feels like it was once a grain storage or something. Somewhere a tractor would have needed to access. So its size starts to make sense a bit. The roof is simple, but I wanted one thing from it really. Light. I need to figure out a way to make the roofs look a bit dirtier, as I think the pristineness of its white and glass construction is making it look a bit unrealistic. But I do appreciate how the clear glass allows a nice amount of light in. I think if I were staying here long term, the local birds might put a dampener on that though. One thing that is really pretty actually is the moonlight. When that comes through in the evening, it lights the cows really nicely and creates a really peaceful, tranquil atmosphere. I started putting more effort into framing in this zoo. Granted, if you found this video after watching Rudy or The Lady Designer or ZSH or someone who puts a lot more effort in, you might not think that I am, but I've noticed even from the small amount that I do, it makes a world of difference. And not just door or window frames, I mean like trim on the walls or accents to the buildings that just add an extra touch to be more appealing. For me, flat roofs can be tricky because unless you're planning to put something up there, it's kind of just a solid block of colour in the aerial view of the zoo. So even a small detail, like framing it out, really helps break it up a bit. Although what I will say is, the beams that are part of the roof pieces don't line up where the glass has been added, and that really bothers me. One of the nice features of this barn is the double doors on the front. In many ways these are just the same as the sliding doors on the goat barn, but as these are closed I needed to give more thought to how they should work. The sliding mechanisms are pretty cool, although I don't think I would have thought to use a gutter in as the tracks had I not seen other creators doing it, so I can't take all the credit. The issue I had was where I could put the tracks on the building. The breeze block is easy, but it's only a half wall, so even 2 tracks would probably be unbalanced, especially with the doors closed. It just wouldn't be able to support the weight. The wooden part of the wall could probably support a third rail, but it's recessed slightly, so the rail wouldn't come into contact. In the end I decided to offset the weight of the door when closed by putting wheels on it to give it some ground support. I mean, it would be easier to roll back and forth. It means there's a bit of a gap under the door, but given the barn is built to allow plenty of airflow, I don't think it'll make too much of a difference. These sort of builds are quite deceptive, I think. I come away from it feeling like I've done a great job, you know, really put some added detail in and gone the extra yards to create something interesting. And then I take a step back and see a box. I'm not sure exactly how I would have tied it in with the foliage, but you know, maybe that's just coat. I would have liked to have a go. At the very least, some of these building ideas will appear in future builds along with things that I'm learning through these episodes, so there's definitely positives that I can take away from it. I'm trying to experiment a bit with the building pieces to see what works and how I can use various bits to give different effects. I do tend to fall back on things other people have already found though. It's great to do your own research, but it's also smart to pay attention to what others have learned already. And this community is one of the best for sharing creativity. I imagine it's the same for most games with creation baked in as like a core mechanic. Even if you're a top quality builder, there's always styles or configurations or uses that you haven't considered. And seeing those different perspectives only inspires more. That's why, of the top games I love, this was the one I wanted to start my channel with. There's not a lot else to say about these sliding doors. I think they're something we will use quite a bit in my zoos for larger animals. The side door on the other hand is something a little different. It's another one of the nice features of this build, and it's a larger variation of the other type of animal door that I think we will see a bit more of in the future. This zoo is made up of mostly domesticated animals, so some keeper interactions expected and, you know, mostly accepted by the animals, but some are best left to their own devices. In facilities with animals like this, automatic or mechanical doors that can be opened from a distance are preferred. So this side door was a bit of an experiment in something like that. Not from a distance in this case, as it isn't necessary, but an electric door that can be opened similarly to a lot of garage doors nowadays, or garage, depending on where you live. The alternative would be like a cable-drawn shutter that slides up and down. I feel like this is safer for use in, you know, small animals, smaller doors that aren't as heavy. I probably could have done that for the foxes actually, had I thought about it at the time. Anyway, as I was saying, the idea here is a door that can be raised automatically. Thinking of a garage door, this could have been done a couple of ways. I chose to have a flexible roller door that could either be rolled up or pulled around a bend. This means the door itself is not one solid piece, but rather a series of strips of what should probably be corrugated or some type of lightweight metal connected by chains or links or something, so that it can flex around the sturdy frames that act as tracks. I thought this would be a more interesting visual element than the standard rising solid door. I'm quite happy with how this came together in the end. I had to use wood panels as there weren't any metal ones, but I don't think that takes away from the result. I used air conditioning units as the rotor system that would turn to pull the door through the tracks. I have no idea if that's how they work, but it seemed plausible to me at the time, so. I also secured the tracks to the building using the finest of bicycle chains. They probably wouldn't hold much extra weight, but I imagine as long as there are no large, clumsy beasts in the area likely to collide with it, it should be perfectly fine. I also had a go at putting in some wiring to a switch on the exterior of the barn, which is a bit janky at the top where it meets the mechanism. I think in wiring systems is probably something I could leave to be implied in the future. I don't know. I feel like those are the kind of details that elevate you to a great builder if you can get them right. I think like 85 to 90% of this video is just working on the barn. The cows are another species that have a low coverage need, so the design of the pasture was relatively quick. Just add some enrichment, make sure I block off some of the guest view with some nice hedges, add some grass and bushes to make sure there isn't just a grass field, and that's all, folks. The animal that shares its name with the zoo, that is most at home here and would probably be on all the merchandise in the store, has one of the highest effort barns alongside the donkey barn, and one of the least interesting designs. But I think this build shows the most growth and potential for more intricate things in the future. I've said all along, since no luck catching them swans, this has some of the nicest features, regardless of the boxy silhouette. And perhaps at some point I'll have another go in Sandbox and redeem the things that seem underwhelming. You know, I have never played this story in this game, or the challenges. Has anyone had a crack at that? I'm wondering if it's worth committing to. Not necessarily for a video, I mean I've got plenty in the works from that perspective. But just for fun, or to learn some interesting things in the game, maybe some hidden mechanics that are explained there. I don't know. Let me know if anyone's played it or got any opinions on that. Who knows? Maybe I'll learn something useful. There's one other part of this barn that I want to think falls into the category of nice features. However, I'm not sure just yet. I had begun to use some pre-made fencing to create a pen for the cows. You know, along the same sort of lines as the lambing pens for the sheep shed. But just one large space where all the cows could be kept. But something I've noticed, perhaps subconsciously, is the bars on the front of cow sheds where the cows stick their heads through to eat. The bars aren't always straight, you know, up and down. Vertical would have been the word I wanted there. From what I've seen, the bars are slightly at an angle, and I may be reading too much into a single experience and a whole lot of assumptions, but that's potentially because it's safer for the cows when they pull their head back, not to get stuck or panic and get stressed. I don't know. It's another thing that seems plausible, so I ended up remaking the barriers with this in mind. I also found a use for the steel girders that they weren't designed for. If you turn them on their side, they make for a nice little feeding trough, and the square hay bales fit nicely inside of them, although it might fit a bit better on its side. Yeah. Some of the bales do poke through the back a little bit. But that's an example of how doing your own experimentation can turn up some interesting results. And you know, maybe I'll find a better way at some point. It'd be cool to sink a feeding trough into my trough so that the cows actually eat from it, for example. But it's these gradual improvements that lead to a better, more refined build. You may also notice I added a pre-built fence piece leaning up against the wall inside. This is for the keepers to shut in the cows, you know, into their bedding area for the winter or for birthing. I figured it was possible for them to use a movable fence piece that could be locked in rather than a swinging gate. as there'd probably be need for space saving when moving a whole herd. But again, it's entirely possible that I just made that all up. Now, one thing that I am mildly disappointed about is the reaction of the cows entering the pasture for the first time. I have seen several videos of cows getting into their grass field after a long winter locked up in the barn, and their overwhelming happiness that shows itself as they turn into your average small dog with the zoomies. I really wish they'd had that, like a 50% chance when being released into an enclosure. That would have been great to see. They do get excited and start bounding around at times, but it's not the same. We are approaching the scenic scenes now. I know we're still working on the barn, but that's just how simple the requirements were for the pasture. I think for today I will slowly fade away and leave you to enjoy the rest of the video. I hope you've had a good time. Please like and subscribe for more goodness, and I will see you in the next